Hello again. Nous allons maintenant enchaîner avec un panel qui fait partie de la table ronde régionale Amérique du Nord de l'UNEP-FI. We are now going to attend the next session as part of the UNEP-FI Regional Roundtable North America, during which our panelists will explore how banks are reassessing their sustainability approach with a more holistic impact, driving strategy to address risks and opportunities in the transition to a just low-carbon economy. This session will be moderated by UNEP-FI staff member Poulain Tumelo Jiwili Potele. Bonne session à tous et toutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Poulain Potele. I am the interim banking team lead at UNEP-FI, and very happy to be hosting this panel discussion today, where we will be talking about building resilience through impact, reshaping the banking industry. Now, I am joined by Davida Hela, who is the Senior Vice President of Sustainability and ESG at Citi, Claude Breton, who is the Vice President of Public Affairs and Corporate Social Responsibility at the National Bank of Canada, and Dan Sakardi, who is Senior Director, Company Network at Ceres, and also the North America representative on the PRB's Civil Society Advisory Body. Welcome to all of our panelists. So in this panel discussion today, we will be talking to two PRB signatory banks and hearing from them on how they are delivering on their PRB commitments. We'll also hear from Ceres on their expectations from banks and what is needed to accelerate the transition to a low carbon and inclusive economy. So I think we have a lot to cover. Let's get right into it. So Davida and Claude, I'll start with asking questions to you, and maybe Davida, you can go first, and Claude, you can follow. Citi and NBC are both founding signatories of the Principles for Responsible Banking. These are a global framework that is delivering the sustainable banking system of the future. With a coalition of 250 signatory banks, the PRB celebrated their second year anniversary last month, marking 2 years of PRB implementation. So 2 years on, how are the principles supporting your banks in aligning their business strategies with the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and also helping your bank to make substantial contributions to national and international priorities? Davida, over to you.
Thank you, Poulain, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this really great discussion. It truly is amazing to think about how much has happened in the world and the climate space since the launch of the Principles for Responsible Banking. Citi is very proud to be a signatory to the PRBs and be the first major U.S. bank to endorse. We have a 25-year track record in this work, and a lot of it really started with joining UNEP-FI back in 1997. We've been doing a lot of work during that time, and the Principles for Responsible Banking have really helped to provide a structure to that. We've been a vocal supporter of the Paris Agreement and been aligning our strategy to the SDGs since their launch in 2015, with mapping our environmental finance and ESG performance. But with the PRBs and the impact analysis exercise, conducting that at a qualitative level has really helped to formalize our processes for looking at how to measure and determine impact and assessing which areas of impact we should really focus on in the coming year, now and in the coming years. And the PRBs have really helped us to formalize a methodology and really look at disclosure through the PRB disclosure requirements. I think that really a large benefit is the engagement of the other banks and through the leadership of UNIP FI to really understand the implementation progress for all the signatories. And it's really helped to confirm that our two areas of impact that we identified, which have been climate change and racial equity, really align with the top impact areas and alongside many of our peers. And this adds another benchmark towards our strategy setting and introduces new impact areas that we may not have considered also for ourselves. So that engagement has really been helpful. I think the PRBs really have helped to provide a helpful framework for developing these strategies and looking at additional ESG priorities, even beyond climate and equity over time, and for the consideration of social issues when we're looking at climate and environmental and vice versa. So really that engagement has truly been quite helpful for us as we integrate the PRBs into our strategy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Davida. Let's go over to you, Claude.
Yeah, thank you, and bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everyone. So on our side, PRBs, I would say are a good picture of how we operate, and that's why we decided to sign it. So as a matter of history, and I'll make it quick, over the last few decades, we've been building our bank, having all the stakeholders in mind, being civil society, shareholders, employees, clients, or others, and we wanted to work with our DNA, not forcing the DNA. So the moves we were making are authentic and supported by the employees in the community. So we were seeing the PRBs as a way to operate with that mindset. So the PRBs created a more, I would say, structured conversation around what we wanted to achieve in terms of sustainability and what were the areas of focus we would like to move on. So looking at the PRBs, we thought we were doing good on the principles 4, 5, 6, so which relates more to culture, governance, and the PRBs were creating the conditions to do better on the principles 1, 2, 3, which is alignment, client, customers, and what you do for them. So so it led when we signed, and we were with Citi in New York at that time. When we signed in 2019. It led to the board adoption of our 9 ESG principles internally that are linked to the SDGs. So that created a great conversation, and it ended indeed to integration of sustainability into the strategic planning process of the bank. So you see that the PRBs are a tool to open up the dialogue, have the real conversations, engage with external stakeholders, and then land on something that will change the future for the bank and for the stakeholders we're working with. So so that is all pulling. I'll pass on the mic to you again.
That is fantastic to hear from both of you. Let's now move over to Dan. Dan, as the Senior Director at Ceres and the North America representative of the PRB's Civil Society Advisory Body, what is your expectation of PRB signatories in the region? What should they be focusing on and prioritizing right now?
Great, thanks, Pulang, for the question, and also glad to be with everyone here today. So just building on the comments that Claude and Davida shared, I think what we are hoping to see from the North American banks is to continue demonstrating leadership. There, the range of banks that are part of PRB are at varying stages in this important journey, and North American banks are, given their track record and long history on reporting in general and the climate disclosure in particular, have an opportunity to help lead. I think as we'll see in an upcoming PRB progress report, while there has been really important work underway by all the member banks, the reality of the challenge ahead of us is that the pace of measurement, of disclosure, and associated action do need to increase. And so we're hoping that North American banks can show both what's possible, but also what's needed to move more quickly, and perhaps the role of non-competitive collaboration can play. As far as prioritization, I think we would see two key areas of focus for both North American banks and banks more broadly. One would be on data gathering and associated analysis. We know this is clearly a complicated topic because it really relies on getting information from all the sectors and companies that banks do business with. But in order for the banks themselves, as well as we as external stakeholders, to have a complete understanding of both the risks and opportunities that banks, as well as really broader society, face from both transition risk and physical risk, having that analysis gathered and disclosed is key. And then we just quickly say the second piece here is on client engagement. We also know that this is beginning and is underway. But because really the bank's success in meeting their own climate-related goals will lie on their ability to engage with and ultimately help move the companies and the sectors that they provide financing and do business with. And so really ramping up that area of climate engagement would be another key piece of area to focus.
Thank you, Dan. So we're hearing client engagement is really important. Data gathering, which we know is a very, very big challenge, and I'm sure we'll hear about it more in the session. So those are really important. Understanding impacts, some of the key things that you've raised there. And I think all of those really do ring true for PRB signatories as a whole, and I think also Davida and Claude for you. So Davida, let's go to you in connection with that. So Citi is also a founding member of the Netzero Banking Alliance, which launched in April of this year. And this is a coalition of 55 leading banks that have committed to align their portfolios with a 1.5-degree goal, focusing on carbon-intensive sectors. This is a very ambitious commitment, particularly due to the rigorous guidelines that support the commitment. So, Davida, tell us why it was important for Citi to join this alliance, and 5 months on, what are Citi's plans for setting targets?
Absolutely. Another great question. I mean, I think we believe that banks have a key role to play in the global transition to a low carbon economy. And as you mentioned, Puleng, this aligns with NZBA's focus to help deliver the banking sector's ambition to align its climate commitments with the Paris Agreement goals, and really focus on collaboration, as Dan mentioned earlier, rigor, transparency, and the guidelines can be applied to the bank's Paris-aligned or net zero by 2050 targets to really support the temperature goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And I think that there's, increasing granularity required of the financial institutions' climate commitments within NZBA, and it's a necessary step forward as the financial sector continues to focus on climate alignment and looking at, different stages from 18 months to 36 months and how targets that need to be grounded in climate science for high emitting sectors like agriculture, fossil fuels, power generation, cement, etc. These need to be increasingly set. I think that, for us, the NZBA and the guidelines really provide a clear signal to the market for how we expect to develop our net zero strategy over time. And that's really in terms of level of ambition and the sectors that are included. And we think that NZBA will be really a useful facilitation for that collaboration that we've been talking about, and really looking at, how do you identify and address the key challenges that we're all going to face on this journey. For us, Jane Fraser, our CEO, announced on March 1st of this past year our announcement, our commitment to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And this includes our interim targets for energy and our energy and power portfolios by 2030. And we will be publishing our initial net zero by 2050 plan by early 2022, and other ways that we have been thinking about how to implement this is we formed an internal net zero task force comprised of seniors around the bank to help develop the plan, conduct the analysis needed as we develop these targets. And just like everything else for us, that transparency and disclosure will be really critical. And we will continue to report on our progress annually. But I think that the process this is difficult work, but we have rolled up our sleeves. We are jumping in, and we think the NZBA will be a very helpful guide for that process.
Absolutely. And I think just to the point that Dan was making earlier on around collaboration, so working together to try and find solutions or learn from each other with regards to some of these very difficult issues and challenges that you all will face as you set these long-term and the interim targets. Davida, just a follow-up to you. So the Net Zero Banking Alliance, this commitment, it is underpinned, as you have said, by guidelines for climate target setting. And these guidelines ensure robustness in target setting, and they include things like the kinds of scenarios that can be used, that certain carbon-intensive sectors, that targets need to be set against certain carbon-intensive sectors, and that a periodic review of targets is important, and that also to consider the impact of these targets in general on other SDGs, right, or other SDGs that can be addressed as you set targets, to put it differently. And the first round of targets, as you say, you are working on these, and those are due within 18 months of signing up to the Net Zero Banking Alliance. And some would argue that that period, this 18 months, is too long, given the scale of the crisis that we're facing. So can you share some details about the process that is involved to set these targets? What are some of the challenges that you need to work through in order to set these robust targets? Now, I think you've already partially answered this in what you've just said, and I think Dan has also alluded to some of the challenges that are faced here. So, Davida, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to the comment, is it too long? I absolutely understand that sentiment. I think that this work is critical. It's very involved, and it is quite difficult. It is not simple, but the work is underway, and it involves multiple different steps that are being taken. So identifying our scope, establishing our baseline emissions, looking at and selecting appropriate climate scenarios for covered sectors, setting our targets, our metrics, and then obviously, eventual reporting. And as I mentioned previously, governance is a really important factor here. In addition to our Net Zero Task Force, we've also established a global ESG council consisting of senior members and management that offer enhanced oversight of all of our ESG strategies and activities, including net zero. And I think that we've also started to expand our teams that are really focused and different on the opportunities as well as the risk side across city, which I can talk to about that as well. I think from a challenge perspective, which Dan mentioned, data is really, I think, a primary challenge that we're facing. But I think that it's one that we have to just continue to work through. And I think on an annual basis, that data, as client engagement continues to evolve and we do continue to get more direct data rather than any kind of, proxy data, I think that that will continue to evolve the reporting that happens. And so, I think data will probably be a challenge ongoing, but it's one that just, we have to do the work in spite of that challenge.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Davida, for setting out what some of those challenges are and also the process of setting these targets. And we know that there's a lot of work that is going on at the moment with PRB banks to actually measure those emissions, and that there are a lot of challenges in that particular process. Also hearing about the ESG council that you've set up, and it just sounds like it's a real process, and it's good to hear that it seems like it's really ingrained within your governance structures, and you've got very good oversight over this process. Claude, let us turn to you now. So in April, NBC published its climate ambition to align its portfolios with a net zero emissions goal by 2050. And you would have heard from Dan and other civil society organizations of the importance of having interim targets to support this long-term goal, as well as clear action plans. So can you tell us about NBC's climate commitment and the bank's plans to publish interim targets and plans? Over to you, Claude.
Sure, thanks for that. So I'm hearing Dan and a dog, that's for sure. Yes, so we hear the civil society and other stakeholders on that team. So so on our side, first we set an interim target for reducing GHG emissions from our own operations. So what we do control. So we decided to reduce by the end of 2025 GHGs by 25% when you take 2019 as a basis. So we kept also in that plan the usage of plane for travel purposes. So we'll be tracking employees in their usage of planes. So to make sure that we got that contribution to reduce GHGs, and the job ahead is a tough one because the bank is based mainly in Montreal, so the head office is in Montreal. We do have our electricity feed that comes from hydropower. So National Bank has for now one of the lowest carbon footprint in North America. So if you measure it by dollar of revenues, by square feet or other measures, that's one of the lowest footprint in North America. So we're trying from that low base to push that further and make more headways reducing the impact. So it's going to be done with entertaining the dialogue with our suppliers, employees, and then moving on, learning from that and moving on to the portfolio, our lending book, and making sure that we do some progress on that front too. So it comes back to Davida's and Dan's point. I mean, data is the key. It's not easy. We got a lot of people working on that and trying to achieve the most reliable data that we can use to set up the next targets. So we're going to be establishing most probably 5 years targets up to 2050. so that we make sure we meet those thresholds, and we can be with great transparency, sharing with the communities what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we make sure that we reduce the impact of the bank. So that's about it on my side.
Oh, Pauline,
No,
I think
Pauline,
you're
you're
on
mute.
mute.
Okay, good.
Oh, apologies. Indeed, there is a dog in the background that is barking here, so I had muted myself. So I had said, I was saying, Claude, that you too are embarking on this a challenging journey of measuring emissions across your portfolio. And just a follow up to you. So earlier this year, the Canadian government had announced a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. So maybe tell us a bit about how is this commitment at the national level supporting your bank's target setting journey?
Yes, that was very early in the signing of those commitments internationally. We were looking at governments saying we just can't be alone, the private sector doing work on that. So this was great news that we saw governments moving on, the Canadian government going out with that commitment. So we need to be navigating the same waters, that's for sure. So the Canadian government, the commitment is made in Canada to a very own Canadian challenge. So you need to understand that Canada is a wide and huge country. The western part of it produces oil and gas. So this is where it comes from. The eastern part is using nuclear power and hydro here in Quebec. So the Canadian commitment is a tool to open up the dialogue within our own country and finding solutions to this very particular problem. So you just can think of, and I'm talking about the Canadian reality here, and I know that some people on the line may not be agreeing with me, but it's very difficult to unplug everything overnight when you talk of oil and gas in Canada, because it feeds on a lot of jobs, and it contributes to a lot of what we do here. So it needs to be a planned transition. So there's a lot of people wanting us to move faster. We understand it. But we also got that social responsibility to do it in some following some sort of a plan, so to make sure that when you talk of a just transition, no one is left behind. But yes, we do hear Dan and the civil society saying, "Okay, guys, go faster." We hear it loud and clear. And so trying to establish the most ambitious plan fitting into this very particular Canadian reality.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Claude. I think that pointing out what the challenges with regards to the Canadian economy are, but that having a government having made this commitment really is helpful in terms of finding solutions, and also pointing out the fact that as you set targets, it's quite important to consider the impact that you're having on other SDGs and try to make sure that your targets and the way that you transition the economy actually does take everybody along on the journey. So that is quite important. Dan, let us turn to you. Can you tell us about the Ceres Ambition 2030 initiative and how it is supporting banks with their portfolio decarbonization?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So our Ceres Ambition 2030 effort is aiming to bring together the work we've been doing and the decades of engagement we've been leading with companies across the major sectors of the economy under a common umbrella to help move these individual sectors and really these sectors collectively towards the scale and pace of progress we need to achieve in order to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and keep temperature rise to no more than 1.5 degrees. And so for those who might be familiar with Climate Action 100+, which is a investor-led initiative that Ceres is a part of, that too builds on decades of work that our investor partners have been doing individually with banks, but have been bringing that together under a common framework and umbrella. And so this similarly is doing that with the private sector. And the aim is to focus on 5 key emitting sectors, which are electric power, food, oil and gas, steel, and transportation, as well as the finance sector in its pivotal role as providers of capital to all of those sectors, which collectively make up roughly 80% or so of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so as far as how this effort can help the ambitious work ahead for the banks, we see it as supporting, certainly complementary and hopefully enabling the work that the banks need to do. Because as mentioned earlier, in order for banks to first measure, but then ultimately set goals against and reduce their finance emissions, those are the emissions that companies across all sectors, but certainly these 5, which again are electric power, food, oil and gas, steel, and transportation. Those are certainly the 5 key sectors to start with. And so our aim is that through our engagement with those sectors, we can help in the effort to have those sectors provide the emissions data that all stakeholders, including banks, need, as well as set their own Paris-aligned net zero goals for their individual companies and by extension the sectors overall. And so our ambition is that if those sectors are moving at the speed and pace and scale that we are aiming to push them, that it will then help really make the task ahead for the banks a little bit easier, because there'll be more data for them to gather, and they'll be easier to engage sectors and companies once they've set their own ambitious targets themselves.
Okay. That sounds like really helpful work. Having listened to Davida, I see you smiling there. Having listened and heard that one of the very big challenges is around access to data and data availability. So, and also focusing on those key emitting sectors as well. So Davida and Claude, let me turn my attention once again to you. So in closing, and before we go to our Q&A, we know that in order to achieve the SDGs, we need to see financial flows align with the most pressing international and national goals and priorities. What does this mean for your bank's business over the next 5 to 10 years? And where, besides climate change, which we have discussed extensively, do you see the opportunities to create significant impact through your core business? Davida, shall we go to you and then we'll go to Claude?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a really important point, because when we think about achieving the SDGs and the importance of this work, right? It's not just about managing down the risk, and I think our banking teams really are seeing this as a clear growth and opportunity area. And over the next 5 to 10 years, we're seeing it happen so quickly now that this is really becoming a feature of our core business and very consistent with the focus of our client conversations. I think internally at Citi, in addition to the the new approach with, not really new, but the expanded governance approach that I mentioned before, we're also really expanding the scope of our coverage. So really looking at developing new teams to work with our clients across all of our businesses, whether it's banking, capital markets, advisory, trade services, markets, etc. We have a sustainability and corporate transitions team that is really working with our clients to identify how do we help them achieve their sustainability goals and look at these very important transition pathways and help support that. We have just recently shuffled a few teams around for our natural resources and clean energy transitions team, and we have champions, ESG leads and champions that are emerging across all of our regions in these multiple businesses. The other piece of this for us that we'll be really focusing on over the next 10 years is our announcement of a $1 trillion commitment to sustainable finance by 2030. This is all in support of the SDGs. We had been working quite a bit on our environmental finance approach to accounting, and we've had multiple targets there, and we now have a 500 billion environmental finance target by 2030, and that focuses on everything from renewable energy to sustainable transportation to sustainable agriculture and circular economy activity. But we just recently announced a 500 billion social finance goal, and this is new for us. We knew this was going to happen. We knew we wanted to do this. Social has always been a little bit more difficult, but I think over the last 2 years, we've really seen a very much welcome connection between the E and the S. So we were really thrilled to make this announcement. And I think just to wrap, these targets for us are, we do not have line of sight for achievement of these. These cannot be achieved by BAU at all. Our previous targets, we got there a few years early, not the same. This will need a different approach. And so I think in alignment with the idea of really the importance of communicating our journey, it's not just about the achievements, it's about really showing how are we doing this, what is our approach, and engaging on that collaborative effort on this journey pulling, as you've been saying. I think this aligns nicely with also how we see our net zero strategy and the approach of how we are looking at our client portfolios, and will continue to report as those targets are set and that progress is made.
Sounds great, Davida. I think focusing on the environmental challenges, focusing on the social challenges as well, and then also having this engagement across teams, I think, is also just such an important aspect of actually making sure that implementation, reaching the strategies that have been set by the bank actually do happen consistently. So I think that's actually quite an important element as well. Claude, let's go over to you.
Yeah, sure. And David, I pretty much like your connection between the E and the S. That's great. So I'll make it quick because I think we'll be running out of time soon, but I would put it two ways when we look at next steps. The first one relates to our own DNA. So we do still view the benefit of bringing each and every day on our side a nuanced and balanced approach to the conversations we are putting out there on social networks or elsewhere. So there's no products behind it. There's no solution, but this is very important to be out there and thinking out loud on the climate or social issues you can hear about. So it can be right or left, or vaccine, no vaccine, or other themes. But we like to take time and be that rock and do the sea of change as people see some institutions slipping away. So we want to be that rock. So we will be that rock in those teams, be it climate or social. And the second thing is, if we talk about products and solutions, there's a lot of room to be creative. So if you think of sustainable bonds or other developing products, there's a lot to be done. If we think of First Nations or other communities where we can help them build infrastructure and other stuff that will change the future. So this is a lot we will be working on over the next few years. And there's biodiversity. We see the world moving towards biodiversity. We see our clients doing better on that front, and we want to be there to help them and contribute to this overall goal we are all looking for, which is doing better on the biodiversity front. So if I'm finishing on that, dialogue is key. It all ends up into great conversation we can have within or with stakeholders, and then achieving together what we're trying to achieve, and not think that as we're a private sector we don't got those tools to move things. This is not true. We got a lot of tools, we got a lot of capital to put forward, and we can change the world, that's for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Claude. And I think, you say dialogue is key, and absolutely. And you talk about working with your clients. And that is really the only way, right, to achieve targets, to actually drive that transition. So that's really key. And also biodiversity, and how important it is to focus on that. And also just thinking about how connected that is to climate change, right? And how those two impacts really do reinforce each other. So I think really important to bring that into the discussion. Now, as you had said, we are fast running out of time. Dan, I'm going to come to you with your last question, and then I see we've got one question in the question box, and I will then pose that question. So Dan, Ceres engages and collaborates with a broad range of stakeholders, including financial sector actors and policymakers. What do you think is needed to help financial institutions accelerate their contributions to delivering low carbon, nature positive and inclusive economies?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question, and building on the comments that David and Claude were making, $500 billion here and $500 billion there, and soon you're talking about a lot of money. But I think in all seriousness, what the banks are starting to do is important, but the reality is we need an all hands on deck approach. The private sector, spurred on by capital provided by the financial sector, has a huge role to play here. But we would also say that there's a key role for regulators and policymakers. As we're seeing actively being discussed, it seems like some form of mandatory climate disclosure is on the horizon here in the U.S. And whatever form that might take, that should also help spur the provision of accurate and complete, or at least more complete, data that all stakeholders, investors, civil society, as well as the banks themselves need to do the analysis as necessary. Similarly, as we're also seeing in the US, there's an active conversation and hopefully actual progress made on the US reconciliation bill that could put literally trillions of dollars towards climate. And that really is at the scale of what's needed, and it can't simply be the private sector, but it needs to be spurred on by the right set of policies and incentives to help drive flows of capital towards climate positive and climate resilient investments, and drive capital away from business as usual technologies and financing. And so it's really that chorus of efforts from what the banks themselves are doing, what the private sector is doing, what investors are calling on, as well as the role that regulatory and policymakers have, and civil society to push us all forward.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that response, Dan. In the very last 2 minutes that we have, we do have one question here. And Claude, I will pose it to you. And so the question is really about, you had mentioned earlier on, that fossil fuels are quite a big industry in Canada. And the question is really about how are banks moving forward in terms of, the level of exposure that they have to fossil fuels in the context of setting climate targets, and that CDP has set targets for investments. Are banks doing the same? So I think you had alluded to this earlier on, but anything that you want to say in the 1 minute that we have left as we close?
Yeah, and I would like to say to Dan that you got a great cat.
Yes.
So we had a dog and a cat in the session. We cut it by half the exposure to oil and gas over the last 4 years, I would say. So it's only to show that there's a way to play it, so you can still be there, help clients to move, transition to cleaner form of energies, but not doing that overnight. So it's doable. You need to have those conversations with clients, and then it can be achieved. That's for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Claude. Any further reflections, Dan or Davida, to that particular question, or shall I use the last minute to just wrap up?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, just to say, I think it's an important question, and I think that, we are seeing important focus on what the impact of these of net zero will be to fossil fuels. And I think, for us, we have updated our policies. Agree with Claude, can't happen overnight, and need to think about, from an environmental justice perspective, what that looks like globally. But I do think it's a very important part of the conversation that is happening as we think about transition and what the impact will be.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Davida. Dan, anything in closing? Very happy to give you the final word here.
I would agree with what both Claude and Davida have been saying, just in terms of the challenge of the task ahead, but the reality that we need to get it done. And so the pace needs to accelerate, but it needs to be really a collective collaboration between civil society, government, and the private sector.
Fantastic, and we're being told that time's up. So thank you very much to our panelists. It's been a very engaged session. Last words, we do need to accelerate, but there is already a lot of work that is underway, and it's very encouraging. So thank you very much to everybody who has been sitting in on the session. Thank you very much to our panelists. Have a great day further. Goodbye.
Merci.
Merci à tous les intervenants et intervenantes. Thank you all.